and I'm just very excited and honored to be leading the panel with such esteemed colleagues to my side. So I'm not going to steal their thunder. I'd like to let everybody just introduce themselves real quickly before we kick it off with some thought-provoking questions.
Sure. Let's check our mic here. I'm Philippa Burgess. I'm with MMJ FinSol, and we are a financial services company for the cannabis industry, hemp and CBD, helping with all things banking, merchant processing, and also just being putting a lot of resources out to help growing businesses.
Jim Marty. I'm a CFO, CEO of Bridge West CPAs. Started here in Colorado, signing cannabis tax returns about 10 years ago. And today we're 125 people and have clients in every state of the union that has some form of legal marijuana and now hemp.
Hi everybody, my name is Jessica Velasquez. I am also a CPA, CFE, founder and managing partner of Indiva Advisors. We are also a CPA firm that specifically caters to cannabis and hemp clients.
My name is Scott Jordan, and I am a founder of the Alternative Finance Network. I've been doing loans in the marijuana space since 2009. I've put together a network of private lenders, hedge funds, and family offices in order to help people get the capital they need to be able to expand in the areas of working capital, equipment lending, and real estate lending as well. Glad to be here.
My name is Zabeth Chacon. I am your friendly banker. I am here as a business development for helping hemp and CBD companies find business solutions and banking solutions for your industry.
Great. So I'm going to kick it off with a couple of acronyms that we might be going over. How many of you are familiar with what a SARs report is? So if you're not familiar with what a SARs report is, only got a couple of hands. That stands for a suspicious activity report, which must be filed by depository institutions within 90 days, am I right, of really noticing any marijuana-related business activity. There's a split in terms of thought as to whether or not hemp-related businesses are marijuana-related businesses or whether or not a SARs report is necessary. But as of recent data, there's now 715 depository institutions in the United States that are actively banking marijuana-related businesses, and that's as of the end of June. So it's presumably even more since then. And from these 715 or more institutions, there have now been over 87,000 SARs reports filed. That's 87,000 reports reporting either normal marijuana-related activity, not sure, questionable marijuana-related activity, all the way down to these folks are breaking the law, you should take a deeper dive. So I just want to kick it off with, from the banking side, what is your determining factors between a marijuana limited SARs, a marijuana priority SARs, or a marijuana termination SARs report?
Okay, so just to be clear, SARs reports are going to go out to any industry, not just cannabis. So just so we're all clear, there's tiers of different marijuana industries. So the big part of marijuana is if you are touching, is what they say, if marijuana is passing through your hands, that is going to be the biggest risk for your business. So if you are direct retail, like a dispensary, that's probably why it's being a red flag, and it's hard to finding banking solutions for you. If you are in the industry of like a lab, or if you do if you're a grower, then you're kind of in a tier 2 spot where it's not, if we want to use the word risky, but in some way or form, you're still touching marijuana. Now, if you are in an ancillary business, which is servicing the industry as like security guard, or if you're transporting, that's the less riskier tier. That is a lot easier to find banking solutions and depository accounts for you. And you're selling your equipment directly to Oh, you're actually processing and packaging. That probably is a tier 2 because it's going through, again, they use in the law through your hands, but it's not as the most riskiest where you're actually selling it at a retail dispensary.
And I'm sure everybody's.
There's somebody in the back.
Oh, sorry.
So usually a SAR report is not going to go out unless you're suspecting that your customer is doing fraud or you are doing some sort of money laundering. So you can be a grower and it doesn't mean specifically a SAR report is going to go out for you. It's just if things look a little fishy and you come to our bank 3 or 4 times a week trying to deposit large amounts, and then we have to take notice of that.
And if a bank were to not file a SARS report, am I right that you could be fined $25,000 to $100,000 for each and every day that the financial institution is non-compliant under the Bank Secrecy Act?
That's correct.
So a lot of folks think that there's risk on the CBD side, but there's tremendous risk on the banking side, and hopefully over the rest of this panel we'll discuss how we bridge that gap. So to kind of get deeper into this all, I would like to kick it off with the necessary link between merchant processing and banking. You can't have one without the other, am I correct?
I'll jump. So this has been the roller coaster ride of this year, and because it's meant to be transparently, it's meant to be processed high risk, and obviously most of you know the Elavon story. When the Farm Bill was signed, they said, hey, we're going to get into it. They're a U.S. bank subsidiary, and as I understand it, it was 6 months that it took the Department of Justice to come in and shut them down and have them release 40,000 accounts. And thus the roller coaster of my summer began. That really, a lot of people landed on our door to sort of say help. And Greenbox had a lot. I mean, basically, what you'll see is there's 5 to 7 compliant solutions that are wrapped around 100 agents, and many of us partner with each other. So it's not a lot of solutions out there, and they're up and down. T1, Greenbox, are sort of have been go-to in the space. Greenbox is the CBD counterpart of M-Track on the cannabis side. T1's an offshore in England. So basically, we're now seeing more domestic banks come into the space, but there's evolutions of compliance that we're seeing, and now we're seeing the need for a compliant bank to be tied to our next wave of solutions that we're seeing, because it's the acquiring bank. There's an acquiring bank for the credit card processor, but then there's the bank that the money's going into that the merchant, the business owns. And so some of our next, because with Greenbox going flatlining recently, my understanding on that one was that people were getting approved through underwriting to do certain activities and then promptly going off to do other things, and the acquiring banks threw a fit, and they were not amused by that. So it is a hard space, because when I work with cannabis customers, they understand it's a very, it's still a Schedule I drug. There's a lot of federal, and a lot of the safe banking is about getting cash off the streets. It's more like, we will not prosecute you, not, oh, go for it. So there's a lot of but with cannabis, they get that it's difficult, and they're usually very grateful for compliant solutions. We can pretty much get anybody banked for any part of THC in any state. But we also, with CBD, it's really hard, where people are like, this should be easy, this should be legal. Why is this so hard? And I think that's where a lot of the confusion is that by a bank standard, their language around this is still, marijuana is a Schedule I drug. Hemp is a derivative of the marijuana plant, therefore not in our risk matrix. And they're still not full compliant, not full direction on FDA. So banks, being relatively risk adverse and have huge regulatory burdens upon them when they do choose to engage in this space. And so that is not to be ignored, how much is on the bank in terms of audits and fees and compliance. So the banks, so we charge to put our customers in secure, compliant, transparent banks, and the banks charge monthly analyzing fees to make sure that these accounts stay compliant.
And it's important for the compliance too, as you're saying, Philippa, because that can lead to seizing of assets of non-cannabis. And the bank is trying to protect everyone as much as they want to have accounts for everyone in the cannabis industry. We don't have guidelines for a bill that's passed that regulates hemp and CBD. We are making that or structuring that as we go, state by state and bank by bank, because there was nothing in that farm bill that helped us regulate that new product that is now legal. So with merchant processing, we find that a lot of companies that are really subsidiary companies or banks that are taking the risk are letting go of the cannabis companies without any warning because no one's regulating that. There is a lot of merchant processing that is not credit cards, that's e-checking, and that's another avenue, but we all know that getting cash off the street, and we all carry credit cards, that's the best incentive for all of the businesses in this cannabis space.
And from a practical point of view, and we have, like I said, several hundred licensed cannabis clients. It's not uncommon for them to pay $5,000 a month for a checking account plus transaction fees. And as we say, they don't have banking services, they have a checking account. Lines of credit, equipment loans, things like that, you got to come and see my friend Scott for that type
That's
of
right.
thing. Scott, do you have a comment?
Yes. The other thing is that people don't realize that I learned at one of the shows I was at is that if a banker takes a transaction that turns out to be fraudulent or turns out to be money laundering, they're held personally liable and personally will be fined, and the bank can't pay that, and insurance doesn't cover that. So you've got a lot of risk on an employee that's not making that much money and to make sure that these complex transactions go through. But in terms of Jim's comments, yes, that's one of the reasons why I created my company, was to help people like yourself that need to purchase equipment, that need capital to be able to expand their business, because everybody needs business. Everybody needs money in order to be able to expand their business, to be able to get that money. I am finding these days, I would say about the last 60 days, more and more small banks and other institutions are starting to put their toe in the water, particularly for real estate and equipment lending. They will look at that, and for hemp, they're even more willing to take a look and lend on those. But what they're doing is they're using intermediaries because they don't want to experience what many Colorado banks experienced back in 2013 and 14, where all of a sudden it got out, Pueblo Bank and Trust is, taking deposits, and then they get 100 applications a day, and they can't handle it, and they get overwhelmed. So.
And that's exactly what we do, is we have partnerships with those banks, and everybody's under NDA. You're under NDA. The banks they just don't want to be rushed, and they look to us to do turnkey packages, all the paperwork fully given to them, and ready to turnkey through underwriting. But yeah, that is one of the reasons why it is hard to find a bank, because the banks who are doing it don't actually want to be found.
Yes, I would agree with that. We have approximately 1,200 active marijuana licenses in Colorado. Those of you from our out of state, please shop. Visit our dispensaries, a little tourism guide, promote the Denver Chamber of Commerce here. But seriously, we have 1,200 active licenses and maybe 5 or 6 financial institutions that are openly banking the industry. So it is very much imbalance. A few financial institutions have come forward to me personally recently to tell me that they were all excited and wanted to take me out to lunch, because now they're accepting hemp clients. But as my new friend Helena has said, that's not always a slam dunk.
No, and there's differences, and I feel like Isabeth and I had been acquainted previous to this panel, but I feel like we're sort of two sides of the same coin, in the fact that we are very startup friendly, but we're also a broker in the space, and I'd like to say more than a broker, but that is essentially what you're asking us to do, is agent a relationship. But we're very startup friendly, so we can pretty much bank anybody anywhere, and people who set up their business yesterday or their new e-commerce store, we have solutions for merchant processing. They may not be ideal solutions, but they are what they are, but we can get people banked and processing.
Where I have qualifications
Yes, you have-
for
you have-
companies that come into,
Yes.
who want a bank.
So so if I'm going to send a customer to Bank of Denver, to Beth, I know that they are a company that's an existing company that's doing everything completely transparently, compliantly, and is an ongoing concern with about $50,000 of revenue a month at a minimum. And that's someone I'd send to you guys.
Correct, and that can range, and anyone will try to look at and see if we can have depository accounts for you, but what has to be understood is that it's a lot easier to audit and regulate a business that has been established for a while, for us, because we're a pretty, like, boutique bank is what you would call us.
So I do want to, oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, so for new business, literally, you will have to establish yourself by taking the cash or check for a time of period before you can reach out to, like, BOFA or anybody else to get the processing going. Is that right?
We can help, but I have to say, you can't blink at the prices. We don't set the prices, they are what they are, and you have to kind of go through the compliance and give us all the documents. And there's quite a bit of document requirements, form requirements to get the bank, to get the merchant processing services. It's doable, it's just not free.
I think that's what we see sort of on the practical side again with our clients when we're doing their internal financial accounting and tax returns and whatnot. It's that initial compliance. You know, as a startup, you're already kind of strapped for cash, right? There's that initial cash that's really going to develop the business. So does a $5,000 account fit in your budget? Is that worthwhile? And what we're finding is, again, in that 0 to 3 years space, more often than not, that $5,000 or $60,000 a year is better spent on inventory, doing your build out, et cetera. So most of those clients are still operating mainly in cash as best possible.
And please don't be discouraged, because there
Yeah.
are banks that will do that,
Yeah.
that will open accounts
And-
for you.
And let me actually give some prices, just because I think we mentioned 5,000. So THC banks, we have a number of them that we work with. They range from $500 a month, and there's other ones that are 1 to 3% of deposits. So that's kind of the scale when you're dealing with the THC side. On the cannabis side, our monthly maintenance fees are about between $50 and $250 a month. Again, these are not free accounts or checking accounts, and we charge a one-time setup fee. It's $950, and that the bank is looking to us to do all the compliance, the underwriting, basically give them a turnkey package. So it's not. I'm just trying to put real numbers on the table so you understand what the costs are involved in that. And then most of the merchant processors have a setup fee of about $250 once you get through underwriting. And there's usually an admin fee now that more and more processors are doing for startups because of the amount of paperwork that's required on the front end, and there's really no margin on that. So with us, we waive that for our bank customers, but just to give some numbers around what you're looking at. But the rates on merchant processing are coming in like 6.95 plus 2% of a high risk, plus 2% if you're on Shopify. Yeah, I mean, they're not for the faint of heart as far as the rates on this stuff. And one of our new processors who's so compliant strict, it's an additional $200 a month just to review your website and COAs every month.
And to chime in on what Jessica said, yeah, we have clients that even if they are banked, they don't deposit all their cash because they don't want to pay the fees.
Absolutely.
And so they'll pay their landlord in cash, they'll pay, whatever bills they can in cash, and deposit what they need to pay their taxes and federal payroll taxes, things of that nature. Just from the CPA side, and I'll let Jessica chime in, but there's certain forms that you need to file. If you get over $10,000 of cash, it's a Form 8300. If you pay anybody over $600, and these don't matter for 1099s if it's cash or check. If you pay anybody over $600, you need to file a Form 1099. We have people come in after the filing deadline, which is basically January, February of a calendar year. Our theory at our firm is better late than never.
Yep.
So if we see a half a dozen 1099s, they forgot to 1099 maybe us or their lawyer. We'll do it in August or September. We've never had a problem filing them late. The IRS is glad to see them. But if you're ever audited, within the first 5 or 6 questions will be, did you file all your 1099s? Did you ever get cash over $10,000? So you really need to be strictly compliant. And many people who come to the CBD and the cannabis are not experienced business people. They don't know what a 1099 or a Form 8300 is. So please educate yourselves to the tax code, get a good lawyer, get a good CPA, and really be compliant, because there are so many traps for the unwary out there.
Yeah, I think, and I'll hand it back over to you here, but I think to piggyback off that, we're asking the bankers and merchant processors and folks to really open up these accounts. The first thing they are typically asking for is financial statements, right? How good are the books and records? What kind of shape are those in? Are your tax filings current? All of this sort of the basic financial due diligence questions. And some clients, for as much as they want banking, that is the first hurdle, is just getting clean accounting and tax documents so that they can show proof of, again, just good financial compliance, because that's what our bankers are looking for.
Yes, yeah, and financial statements in this industry tend to be more of a challenge, it seems.
Sure.
To get people to be current with their financial statements. Tuesday is the filing date for individuals and corporations that are on extension. And people are still scrambling to put together their 2018 books and records. And here it is, October, 10 months later. Don't let that be you.
So whether it's actively banking or even just applying, all the way from those who help folks get these accounts to those who are inside the bank and can see those accounts that are already banking with other financial institutions, how important is redundancy? It's obviously costly. If it's $5,000 per account and maybe $950 for an application, how important is it to file maybe 2 applications so that if you get denied by one bank, you still have banking? Alternatively, if you have banking right now, how important is it to get a second account open just in case, or in merchant processing? Is that an oversimplification of risk management for the attendees, or is redundancy truly important?
It looks like you're looking at me. Okay.
Well,
No,
all
I'm
of
happy
you
to take it.
have
I just want
clients.
to. So I would say we guarantee, like the money for us is we guarantee you an account. So if we can't get you an account, you get your money back. That's not a risk. We have, our client, we're very aware of what's happening in the landscape. There's a pretty known bank right now that people will whisper or show on online groups like, oh, they're banking. And it's like, yes, they are. They actually were one of our partners for quite some time, until we watched their underwriting sort of start sliding from 3 weeks to 3 months, to 7 weeks to 3 months, and got to the point where, and a lot of customers were like, I really want that bank. And I was like, I'm like, I can get you an account open next week. It's going to be out of state, but let's do that. I can have you a concurrent application. And when the other one comes online, if you want to switch over, do it, but we guarantee you a bank account. So that's my job. That's what I want to do. And so I think that's one thing we are very good at, is understanding the landscape and what's switching and where to place people efficiently based on the one that, like, there's a lot of banks out there that, again, you'll hear people say, oh, well, this one, and they'll put you in underwriting for 7 weeks and then they won't accept you. So I think we do try to make sure, like I said, we're helping people because we have a larger view of the whole landscape. Merchant process, so banking, I don't feel like you need to have a backup. As long as you have someone like ourselves on speed dial, we can get you set up, if anything were to happen or we hear something's going to get, they've changed for any reason. But the banks we work with are very secure in this space. One in particular that we love, they do a lot of medical marijuana, so they're very comfortable in the space. Merchant processing have multiple backups. Square is not a secure solution. I love that Square has expanded their program. That was the big news last week. But it is not, it has a lot of parallels to Elevon, and so I know there's a lot of excitement in the industry of like, oh, this is great. And one of the things I see, and I just want to warn about, is that I feel like people are like, oh, well, if Square is doing it, they're just going to, well, banks, they should just accept it then. Like, if they're doing it, then it's just, now it's normal. And it's like, banks do not like this. They do not want you hiding your companies. They do not want you bringing banking that they don't want. I'm going to let you guys expand on this, but fraud and money laundering are a thing. If you are telling a bank you're doing something that they don't, to hide your company is not something we recommend. So definitely get a backup in merchant processing, and I'm going to leave it on.
Yes, I recommend that too, is be upfront on the first meeting. Ask your banker, hey, what is your hemp CBD policy? What is your cannabis policy? Get that away. That should be the first question you ask your banker. As a backup account, I would disagree slightly with you and say it's not a terrible idea to get a backup account, because banks do change.
No, that is absolutely true. I think
They're good today, are they gonna be good tomorrow?
because we can move so quickly in the space, but if you're on your own without someone who, like, this is what we do all day, every day, and there's 6 of us, but without that, yes, absolutely, have backups. And also, banks differ in a little bit of their services. Like, I know on one of our cannabis customers, they came to us for a second cannabis account. They had one that was working quite well. They were just having trouble depositing certain checks, and our other bank could do that for them. So sometimes each bank can meet different needs of yours.
And where I was gonna go with that is establish not just a bank account, but a company that's outside of hemp or cannabis. For instance, if you own your real estate, you have a real estate company, that should not have a problem getting banked, even though you're the landlord and your tenant is a cannabis or CBD company. There's other things that dovetail very nicely with the marijuana industry, like intellectual property companies. They're not touch the plant companies. We've had some setbacks with management companies from some recent tax court cases. So management companies can have a really good, solid purpose, but avoiding some of the onerous tax laws like 280E that are associated with cannabis is not a reason to have a cannabis company.
And
Correct.
specifically, on that point, one of the red flags as a reason to file a SARs report is if there is a consulting, holding, or management company that purports to engage in commercial activity but is depositing cash that smells like marijuana.
Yes.
That's a quote.
Ding, ding, ding. Absolutely.
Jessica?
Yeah, I mean, the recent court cases will, pretty much tell us that those management companies, holding companies, they have to have true, real business purpose, right? In order for them to really stand on their own and be looked at in that fashion by the IRS as it relates to 280E. Otherwise, really what they're doing is collapsing that into the purview of 280E and saying, hey, really you're plant touching. But going back to the banking, again, really good options is to opening up bank accounts as long as you're doing what you need to do on the administrative side internally. Again, keeping good books and records for each of those companies within your portfolio of entities, should you have them. What we've seen in practice is to some degree, some co-fungled mix of books and records amongst the operator, amongst the holding company, amongst, other entities within the structure, the real estate company, let's say. And when it comes down to it again, and you're showing financials to, let's say, a banker, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't smell right. So yes, you're going to get questioned. Likely you're not going to get that bank account because you're not being transparent. The name of the game here, to some degree, is transparency.
And this gentleman over here asked a question about, what is Congress doing? You hear things happening in Congress. And recently, in the last month, the Safe Banking Act has passed with over 300 votes in favor in the House of Representatives, including over 100 Republicans as well as many Democrats. And so now it's headed to the Senate, where it will have a much tougher fight. But at what exactly the Safe Banking Bill does, I would leave to other people on the panel who might want to comment on exactly what that does. But it does, the idea is to get the money off the street.
It also protects the banking industry and the companies that serve the cannabis industry so that they also don't get in trouble for doing services. It's the big one.
What I've seen from the lending perspective is that the more aggressive banks and credit unions are now taking this as a signal the tide has turned, and that there's going to be less prosecution and more acceptance of that. And I think combined with what the NCUA had put out, which is the Credit Union Association, about a month ago, where they said credit unions can go ahead and bank, hemp customers. So we're just seeing this change, sort of like we saw back, at least Jim and I saw here in Colorado in 2015 when Partners Credit Union came on the scene and decided to buck the system and start banking openly, and created a program and then wrote a book about banking cannabis customers. This seems like a long time ago now from the Farm Bill, but it was only 4 years ago.
Great. I just,
Anticipated what you were going to ask. You got the telepathy thing going on.
I just want to go back on the transparency part. It's a lot easier for someone like me to open an account for you if it is very transparent, and even if your business isn't set up right through state governments, it's not like we're there to turn you in. We're there to help you. And even if after that I cannot bank you, I can refer you. So I think a lot of banks, especially small community banks, we're working together to help each other out to find places, because we also don't want just cash out on the street as well, and that doesn't help any of us who regulate money like that. So understand that it's not part of a secret to get you in trouble. It's so that we can help you. We can open these depository accounts for you. And also know that they're talking about charges of $5,000. Not all banks have that. All banks are different on service fees and like business services fees.
So out of the 715 different depository institutions that are banking marijuana-related businesses, I just wanted to give you all the breakdown. 553 of them are banks, 162 of them are credit unions. Do you mind just touching on the regulatory differences as well as the risk differences? Credit unions are obviously more pooled capital, more community-based, and there's good things about that and bad.
So what is a specific question? Are you asking what are the differences from like the private banks and the bigger banks?
Differences as well as risks. For instance, if there's a credit union that only banks cannabis companies, that sounds great because you might get accepted as a cannabis company. But that also sounds horrible if the Treasury wants to go after any one depository institution. It would probably be the one that's cannabis only. So
Actually,
I just want to weigh the risks and benefits of both.
I want to definitely speak to that. So one of the, I remember when I first learned about this idea of cannabis banking, I quickly learned that those banks are only allowed to accept a certain percentage of cannabis money. So there's no such thing as a cannabis-only bank. It is a bank that can accept, but once they hit that threshold, they can no longer accept until, unless their whole book of business expands.
Got it.
So it can only be a percentage of their business.
Do you know what that percentage is?
It's going to it's going
It depends on the bank.
The bank and the levels, but it's not that there's cannabis banks. It is they will bank cannabis as a percentage of their entire business.
Because
So-
you have to look at it as there's risk, and unfortunately right now any marijuana money coming in, you're not FDIC insured. So a bank can't just have all marijuana because then that bank is going to close. So the business, so any business on our banking books has to also match that we can cover assets if those accounts were seized. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. To give a more specific example, recently, without naming any names, there was a Colorado bank that was banking a lot of cannabis-related businesses. It was kind of the go-to. I'm pretty sure they ranked maybe #1 on Google if you were to search cannabis banking. Many people don't know, but they're kind of shutting their doors to that, and it all goes back to a merger. There's a merger pending right now. They're supposed to be acquired by a Californian bank, and the San Francisco branch of the FDIC has recommended that the merger be denied, their FDIC application. How does that play into the bank's side of the risk? If I'm not mistaken, the Bank of Denver is a subsidiary of Denver Bank Shares, Inc., which is public, yes?
Yes.
So if someone were to come along and buy you, or put out an offer to buy you, there's a chance that that it could jeopardize some of your cannabis-related clients if that were a stipulation of the acquirer, right?
If it's a stipulation of another bigger bank than the Bank of Denver, that's going to be for the other bank. Account-wise, that's why it's so important to pass this bill, because then the banks aren't going to lose those accounts. I'm not really familiar on the merging aspect of that,
Okay.
and how that works, and if a bigger bank can close accounts that have already been held there, unless they don't take that, then they obviously have the right to do what they would want to do.
So to clarify, banks can just kick you out at any point, right?
Some do.
And actually, let me speak to that, just to things to expect in this space, and especially if there's not transparency. There's two avenues they have. Merchant processing can be the same. One is the polite letter saying, please, you have 30 days to take your business elsewhere. And the other one is the actual seizure of funds saying, this is under investigation and you may or may not get your money back once we conclude our review.
Yeah, if I can jump in here too, the comment earlier as to whether or not you should look for an additional bank or have additional banking options, I would say yes for this exact same reason, right? So if one of them is kicking you out and says, hey, you have 30 days, we're going to close this account, and they hand you a check, you need to have somewhere to deposit that check because they're not necessarily going to give you cash in some cases.
I would say that that's on the bank's fault then for not being transparent to those companies. At the bank I work at, it's very transparent when we sit down. It's, if you get any kind of cash from another merchant who we can't take, we'll close your account. Now, if other banks aren't doing that and you have multiple banks, that's a problem, I think, for the banks and not the industry businesses, because I don't think that's fair to let them know that after the fact and not before the fact.
So I just noticed that 4 out of the 5 of us are Colorado-based. So I'm going to turn to Jessica and ask, what do you see going on in Nevada and California?
Yeah, so we do have quite a bit of clients in both of those states. California has, I think, been just more banking friendly because the industry has been there a lot longer. Although they just turned into a fully regulated adult use as of January 1, 2018. Cannabis has been in that state for over 20 years. So I think banking there is, they're definitely more open. As the new regulated market has come online, they are asking, again, for more transparency, clean financials. Those are now requirements that we're seeing our clients being asked of, as well as, again, are you current on taxes and so on. So California, I think, again, just a lot more options and banking solutions there available. Nevada, we had our fair share of struggles when we went adult use. But again, I think there are a few banks now in Nevada that are open to cannabis and hemp clients. So, you know, not as constricted as it was 2 to 3 years ago, but still a pretty tight market for as many operators and as much cash that's flowing through our state. You know, I had in particular one client that was acquired by a Canadian company, and the Canadian company was trying to transfer or fund the Nevada operation, and the bank wouldn't take it because now we're talking about international money coming across the border. So definitely some tricky, you know, technical situations that are coming down as the industry is maturing, and we're seeing a lot more of that kind of activity. But we're hopeful that, again, the Safe Banking Act does get some traction in the Senate. I want to take this opportunity to ask all of you to certainly reach out to your senators and make sure you vocalize, you know, your thoughts there as they have this on their docket to really think about and push forward. Because it is really, really important. It does give safe harbor to the banks with taking the cash. And more importantly, it's going to open up a lot more opportunity for folks like yourselves and everyone that's trying to get into this industry, whether it's hemp or cannabis, but really get into the industry and have access to traditional banking services like any other industry, loans, financing, and the like.
Yeah, excellent points, and I was going to add on to that it's a bipartisan issue. It was a bipartisan issue in the House. If you do contact your senators, push that it's a public safety issue, that we don't want this cash. I mean, literally we have people leaving late at night with backpacks full of cash. It's just been a miracle that there hasn't been more crime than there has been. So anyway, just one quick point on transparency. I wanted to zero in on that and say that what we mean by transparency is you should be getting your financial statements quickly. So today is October 11th, and I am expecting my financial statements for September from my accounting department any day.